Well, with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump getting high unfavorable ratings, more and more voters are giving third-party candidates a closer look, including Evan McMullin, who announced his candidacy earlier this month. The independent candidate has his work cut out for him, that's to be sure, since the deadline has passed to get on the ballots in more than half of the states. But McMullin is confident that his message, along with the help from his team of advisors and lawyers, can clear that hurdle. The candidate is a former CIA operative with a focus on counterterrorism in the Middle East, spending more than a decade in the elite National Clandestine Service. McMullin has an MBA from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. You might recognize that because Donald Trump also went there. He briefly spent time as an investment banker for Goldman Sachs before becoming an advisor to the Committee on Foreign Affairs in Congress. Joining me now, Evan McMullin, independent candidate for president. So a few key facts there, but we'd like to get to know you a little bit more than just that. You actually spent some time in Brazil. We're talking so much about the Olympics. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I did a 2-year Mormon mission in Brazil after high school and before I really started college in a serious way. And I learned a lot about the culture there, spent a lot of time working with the people there, learned the language.
Do you speak fluent Portuguese?
I do. It's rusty, so I have to be careful about how I characterize it. I went back to Brazil a couple of years ago and was horrified by how rusty it had become. But after about 10 days, it was sounding much better.
Well,
so.
Luckily, I won't quiz you on that.
Well, thank you.
Not having any experience.
It's a beautiful language, though.
I bet it. I certainly think it is. I also was curious about something else that we learned about you, that you were a volunteer refugee resettlement officer in Jordan, and you did that through the UN. Tell us a little bit about that experience as well.
Yeah, well, I was responsible as a volunteer and on a full-time basis for vetting refugees and determining whether they met the qualifications to be considered officially a refugee, and then whether they were appropriate for resettlement in Europe and even to the United States and elsewhere.
When was that?
That was in 2001.
Interesting.
Yes.
What an interesting time to do that before so much upheaval in the Middle East.
That's right.
What did that experience tell you or teach you about the refugee policy in general? How do you apply that now when you're thinking about some of the obstacles and challenges that our country is facing?
Well, it taught me a number of things. One of the things was about the process that refugees go through when they're being taken from where they are and resettled in safer places. In the case of the United States, if you're a refugee and you come to the United States, it's going to take you 1.5 to 2 years. For them, it's very painful because they just have barely enough to survive on. They're trying to feed their families while waiting for this process to go forward. So it takes a long time if you're a refugee to get to the United States. You're checked by the intelligence agencies here in the U.S., the State Department, law enforcement agencies. You're interviewed multiple times by the UN, too. And, I mean, it's just so much. So there's a big process in play. Of course, we can always make it stronger, and I'm an advocate for that as well. But there's I think, a lot of misunderstanding about what the process is, actually.
Having that you spent some time in that part of the world, I'm curious what you think about our policies there in general. The president 5 years ago said President Assad must go. And now here we are. There's so much war still in that region. Let's talk a little bit about Syria specifically. What do you think we need to do there? What would a President McMullin do first day of office when it comes to Syria?
Well, first of all, if I said something, if I drew a red line, that red line would be enforced. And President Obama made a terrible mistake when he drew a red line around Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons attacks against Syrian civilians and then didn't back it up. What I learned in the CIA, one of the things I learned, is that dictators look for clues from world leaders in the free world around what they'll do to stop or not stop them. In the case of a dictator like Bashar al-Assad, for him to see that President Obama didn't back up that line gave him the green light to continue attacks on Syrian civilians, which has resulted in this massive refugee crisis, which has put all kinds of pressure on Europe and on civil liberties here in the United States. All these things are connected. So if you're President of the United States, you've got to understand that.
So is it repairable, and what would you do?
I think it is repairable, of course, with every day and week and month that goes by when our strategy against ISIS is sort of non-existent or our commitment at the presidential level isn't serious to defeating ISIS, it gets harder and harder and harder. But the simple fact is, this is a massive security threat to the United States and to the world. It's the biggest humanitarian disaster since World War II. We, as a collective, the international community, must respond, and the leadership must come from the United States. We are the only country that can provide it. So I have specific things that I would do.
Give us one.
Well, one of the things is we've got to be more serious about taking the fight to ISIS, and we're not serious about it right now. We're not doing enough airstrikes. We're not working enough and providing enough support to our friends on the ground. We're doing some of that, but not nearly enough. President Obama has promised so many things and he doesn't follow through. So we've got to be serious about taking the fight to ISIS. We've also got to limit the power of Assad and change the dynamic on the battlefield so that we can negotiate more effectively his departure. He has nothing to fear right now because we're not credibly opposing him. Once we change that dynamic on the battlefield, and we can, then I believe we can negotiate his departure.
I have to ask you a quick final question about one of your opponents. Because of your time in the intelligence services and intelligence gathering, Donald Trump was asked specifically about how he feels about intelligence gathering, and let's just listen to what he had to say earlier this week.
Trust intelligence?
Not so much from the people that have been doing it for our country. I mean, look what's happened over the last 10 years. Look what's happened over the years. I mean, it's been catastrophic.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, I would just say that Donald Trump has zero credibility left on really anything. I mean, his campaign is a train wreck. He's a weak man. He's a weak candidate. The truth is that intelligence isn't always correct, and anyone who has any experience with it understands that. You're connecting dots that are incomplete. You're looking for information that is trying to be concealed from you. These are the challenges of intelligence, and a president understands that. But the reality is our intelligence services and our special forces and our military have been tremendously successful at stopping so many attacks against this country and preventing all kinds of threats from reaching our homeland since 9/11 certainly, and we need to honor their service and work to leverage what they bring to the table as much as possible.
We look forward to having you back to talk a little bit more about your leadership experience and the way forward in all these different regions of the world. But nice to have you on set with us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to following your journey.